Hello, my beautiful friends. I hope you're all doing well and staying warm and dry on this rainy, snowy, gross day before Halloween. We always call it Mischief Night here, but I understand that it's called other things in other parts of the country. So I've heard Matt says it was Devil's Night in Detroit. What do you guys call it? Like, I'm super curious if you guys have Mischief Night, Devil's Night. What do you guys call the night before Halloween? Anyway, happy Halloween Eve. I hope you're all staying safe. In the spirit of Halloween, wanted to read you guys a story. And this is a story that appeared a few years ago in the magazine Devolution Z. And I like this story. It's about a schmuck. It's about an unconventional damsel in distress, who really isn't in distress. But I don't want to give too much away. But I hope you're all doing really well and staying really safe. It seems like it's been quite a year, right? I don't know about you, but I definitely did not want to give up Halloween this year. But I feel like we have to improvise. We can't go out. We have to be safe. So in the spirit of that, I wanted to do a reading. Matt and I are putting together a virtual Halloween get together later. So check out my Facebook feed for that. There's a link. So feel free to join us. We're going to eat candy and talk and drink and have fun and show off costumes. I can't wait to show you guys what I've put together for my Halloween costume. I'm pretty proud of it. So anyway, without further ado, here is my story, The J-Dub, which appeared in 2016 in Devolution Z. So here we go. Chuck washed down an OxyContin with the dregs of his vodka and tonic and eased himself into his recliner. The red and blue neon of the non-stop go-go across the street flickered on the grungy wall of his apartment. The couple downstairs was fighting, but the noises were muffled. Some ancient episode of Kolchak the Night Stalker was on TV, but the narcotic fizz effervescing somewhere in his nasal cavity made the plot blurry. The burn in his belly had died to a pleasant flicker, and Maurice's threats were now a dull drone in the back of his skull. At about 4, still dressed in the threadbare suit he'd worn the day before, he jolted out of a fitful sleep. Kolchak was still chasing some monster or other. This time it was a vampire. Hat askew, the daring reporter held a crucifix aloft, saving the day and getting the story, like always. It was too early for that shit. He fumbled in his oversized pockets for his key, bumping something pointy and metallic in the process. The cheap cross he'd worn the night before when he went to Carrie Green's house to do reconnaissance. He headed out to her house again this morning, and her neighborhood slept as he watched from his car. A bracing breeze floated into his window as the smoke billowed out. The yellow digital clock on the stereo said it was 5:17. He should be heading to bed after tying one on, not sitting in some strange neighborhood. But he wanted to get this over with and get Maurice out of his life forever. Movement at the little cottage snapped him back to the task at hand. The dog moved onto the front porch, and Carrie followed, illuminated by the front porch light, the baby strapped into a sling across her chest. She struggled with the lock and strained against the dog's leash. Her small frame seemed overwhelmed. The baby was bundled in a pink hoodie, so Chuck couldn't make out her features. A wisp of dark hair, the same black strands that fluttered against her mother's face, peeked from beneath the hood. He held up his smartphone and clicked some shots. Carrie stooped to kiss the child on the head as they set out on a walk. Chuck slumped down in his seat and watched as the glow from the streetlights followed her up the hill and out of sight. The door creaked as he climbed out. Sweat gathered in his palms despite that crisp breeze. Did he have 5 minutes or 30? He flicked open his switchblade and crept along the side of the house. There was a low window dimly lit behind the blinds, and he slid the silver blade along the metal frame until it popped loose. He tried to push the window up, but it wouldn't budge. He crept on the balls of his feet to the back of the house and tried the knob. When it refused to move, he kicked the door just above the lock. It burst open, and he stepped over the wooden debris. The dishwasher whirred, but the house was otherwise silent. The place was tiny but neat. A small red sofa lined the far wall, and a rabbit-eared TV opposed it. Baby toys were piled in a plastic box, and a dog bed littered with rubber bones dominated one corner. He spied 2 framed photographs on top of the television set. The fresh-faced girl and her fresh-faced baby cuddled in one. He picked it up. The baby was her mother's doppelganger. He'd studied the chubby, innocent face for traces of Maurice, but couldn't find any. He tucked the frame under his arm. The man deserved a picture of his own kid, didn't he? Chuck wondered if he really believed that. He paused at the entrance to her bedroom. The bed was meticulously made with a floral duvet. Chuck wanted to go in, but he couldn't bring himself to cross that threshold, to invade this intimate, sacred space. He had a picture, an address, a description of her home. He had an idea of when she walked her dog, but what he didn't have was infinite time. A baby's cry sent him darting to the back door. Jangling keys and soft murmurs resonated from the front of the home. The door frame was shattered, but he couldn't do anything about that now. He pressed the picture tighter into his armpit and ran into the yard. Her voice rang out, "Who's there?" He rounded the corner, convinced she'd be standing there waiting. His heart hammered and the hair on his arm stood on end as he approached the driveway. His car was only a few hundred feet away. His legs burned as he ran. He flung open the door, tossed the photo inside, jammed the key into the ignition, and peeled off. Maurice licked his finger and ripped a sliver of chicken from a wing. "Now we're talking," he said, swiping his sauce-covered face with the back of his hand. "Let me ask you this. Did you find out if she walks the dog at the same time every day?" This was becoming more trouble than it was worth. "I didn't watch her long enough. It was just after 5 a.m. when I saw her leave." "What difference does it make?" "I got you an address." "Shit. I got a picture of her and the baby, but I left it in the car. I'll bring it to you before I leave. I mean, what more do you need from me?" Maurice smiled as he chewed. Chuck slid the address across the table. "Nah, you're good. You did good, Chucky boy." What Chuck wanted more than anything was to be done with this man. The aura around him was dirty, creepy, and wrong, and it made every cell in Chuck's body ache. The waitress dropped the check at their table, and Maurice wiped his fingers on a ripped, stained paper napkin. "Let me settle up here and we'll walk out to the car. You can get me that picture. I'll get you your money." Sourness gurgled in the pit of Chuck's stomach as he watched Maurice pay his bill and press a toothpick between his lips. The 2 men walked outside. The sun worked its way over the horizon, and the tension in Chuck's shoulders released a bit. The hard part was almost over, and he could move on with his life, maybe even change careers. He pulled open the door and grabbed the photograph. Carrie Green's perfect face beamed at him, and he ran a finger across her puffy plum lips. Maurice sat in his car, one leg hanging out, protruding from a round belly wedged between the seat and the steering wheel. Chuck approached the Chevy and handed over the framed photo. In the passenger seat was a black satchel. Maurice turned and rifled through it. He pulled out a pile of cash, dragging with it a pair of handcuffs. A roll of duct tape poked out from the depths of the bag. Maurice grinned, bits of chicken embedded in his green teeth. "Just like we agreed, you can count it." Chuck stumbled backwards. "I have to go," he said, and wobbled to the Geo. He made it to the driver's seat before puking onto the gritty parking lot. He spat out tiny particles, reached into the glove box for an airline bottle of gin, and swigged down the contents. It didn't stop his hands from shaking, but it dulled the acrid taste in his mouth. Traffic was already lined up on Route 9, and Chuck waited to exit the diner parking lot, his knees involuntarily jumping up and down. He watched Maurice's car swing around him to make a right. He jerked the wheel into oncoming traffic, narrowly missing the front bumper of a Mercedes, and lurched forward. His stomach ached, and the gin threatened to gurgle back up. Cars crept along the 2-lane stretch of highway, and each agonizing minute made Chuck clutch the wheel harder. He jerked the car onto the shoulder and jammed his foot on the accelerator. The wheels bumped along the uneven shoulder. He took the first right he could and sped through 2 red lights until he was forced to slam the brakes for a slow-moving Oldsmobile. The car swayed back and forth as he scoped an opening to pass. He checked his rear view to make sure the cops weren't already tailing him. He floored it and crossed the double yellow line, eased the car back onto Route 9 West, and raced past the industrial wasteland. Oil refineries, abandoned office complexes, and the assorted machinery his mother used to call robot vomit blurred in his periphery. After a few more traffic lights, neighborhoods replaced the manufacturing plants and toxic waste. Nail salons, apartment buildings, and an elementary school breezed by as Chuck kept the Geo between 40 and 45. He swung the car onto Palisade Avenue, coasted down a hill. He wiped the back of his neck and pulled away a handful of sweat. He made a right onto Woodland, pulled up to the curb, and jumped out without closing the door. Maurice's Chevy was parked in the driveway, and the front door was open. Chuck slid into the foyer, skidded on his hip. Blood coated the floor. An involuntary moan choked up from his throat. He pushed himself up and stumbled to the living room, a red handprint smeared down the bedroom door. He paused and listened, every muscle tensed. A noise, something he'd never heard before, taunted him. Whiny, gurgling. He twisted the knob and shoved himself inside. Her nude body was slathered in blood. She hovered over a lumpy figure on the bed and turned at the intrusion. Her face was bathed in red, her eyes the color of ice burned into him. She stood and bared her viscera-caked teeth in a mad smile. Chuck froze and felt warm liquid dribble into his pants. Maurice's fat gut poked up from the bed. He'd been sliced from pubic bone to nipple. Carrie Green bolted forward and clutched Chuck by the wrists. Her skeletal hands and jutting collarbone belied her strength. Ribs heaved just beneath her breasts. Chuck tried to pull his hand back, but he couldn't budge it. Terror worked up from his gut. He could feel her hot, copper-scented breath on his face. The dog bounded across the bed and knocked him back into the dresser. The beast's fangs threatened to rip him apart. The attack provoked a rage in him he'd never felt before. He punched the hellhound in the snout, just the way he'd taken down rowdy drunks at the bar. The creature winced in pain and retreated. His fist kept flailing even after the dog whimpered off. Carrie lunged at him, undeterred by the punches. She pressed him into the wood of the dresser, bore her teeth, clutched his wrists tighter. He pushed back, every muscle straining against her, desperate to keep her at bay. The piss in his pants grew cold, and all he could think about was something he'd seen, bleary-eyed, on Kolchak the Night Stalker in that pre-dawn haze. The cross. The crappy greening cross from Target. He ripped it from his pocket with his free hand, pressed it against her skin. A screech ripped from her mouth, and she fell to the floor. A deep pink crucifix-shaped welt rose on her creamy skin. A baby wailed somewhere in the house, but Chuck couldn't stop. He couldn't feel his legs until he was in the neighbor's yard. A siren cried in the distance. Epilogue. The thrum of the ocean pulled Chuck out of a consuming sleep. His back cracked as he sat up. A year ago, he would have popped an opiate or three, but since he'd given up the business, his ulcers almost never flared. He tied his robe at the waist. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he lumbered to the kitchen. The place wasn't much, a little seaside shanty with a galley kitchen, living room, dining room combo, and a bedroom, but it was hundreds of miles from the two-bit PI life and that thing. Even now, in the tranquility that engulfed the Seabreeze mobile home park, the thought of her revved his pulse. He scooped some coffee into the coffee maker, pressed the button, and stepped into his slippers as the machine gurgled. He opened the door. The sun beamed over the horizon. The light shattered over 1,000 waves. Chuck held a hand over his eyes as he walked to the park's mailboxes. He fished the key from his robe pocket and stuffed it into the box marked 23. He recovered a supermarket flyer, a power bill, an overdraft notice from his bank, and a plain envelope without a return address. It was heavy. Puzzled, he set the rest of the mail onto the curb and ripped open the envelope. He shook out one greening gold cross purchased a year ago from the Target women's costume jewelry department. And there we have it. That is the J-Dub. Thank you guys so much for checking it out. And I hope you have a fantabulous Halloween. I hope you stay safe. And I will be seeing you guys later. Bye.